Section 4 of Werewolf, 5 pieces, by various. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Section 4, The Werewolf, by Clemence Housman, Part 2. Swain was a skeptic. His utter disbelief in Christian's testimony regarding the footprints was based upon positive skepticism. His reason refused to bend in accepting the possibility of the supernatural materialized. That a living beast could ever be other than palpably bestial, pawed, toothed, shagged, and eared as such, was to him incredible. Far more, that a human presence could be transformed from its godlike aspect, upright, free-handed, with brows and speech and laughter. The wild and fearful legends that he had known from childhood and then believed, he regarded now as built upon facts distorted, overlaid by imagination, and quickened by superstition. Even the strange summons at the threshold, that he himself had vainly answered, was, after the first shock of surprise, rationally explained by him as malicious foolery on the part of some clever trickster, who withheld the key to the enigma. To the younger brother all life was a spiritual mystery, veiled from his clear knowledge by the density of flesh. Since he knew his own body to be linked to the complex and antagonistic forces that constitute one soul, it seemed to him not impossibly strange that one spiritual force should possess diverse forms for widely various manifestation. Nor, to him, was it great effort to believe that as pure water washes away all natural foulness, so water, holy by consecration, must needs cleanse God's world from that supernatural evil thing. Therefore, faster than ever man's foot had covered those leagues, he sped under the dark, still night, over the waste, trackless snow ridges, to the far-away church, where salvation lay in the holy water stoop at the door. His faith was as firm as any that wrought miracles in days past, simple as a child's wish, strong as a man's will. He was hardly missed during these hours, every second of which was by him fulfilled to its utmost extent by extremest effort that sinews and nerves could attain. Within the homestead the while, the easy moments went bright with words and looks of unwonted animation, for the kindly hospitable instincts of the inmates were roused into cordial expression of welcome and interest by the grace and beauty of the returned stranger. But Swain was eager and earnest, with more than a host's courteous warmth. The impression that at her first coming had charmed him, that had lived since through memory, deepened now in her actual presence. Swain, the matchless among men, acknowledged in this fair white fell a spirit high and bold as his own, and a frame so firm and capable that only bulk was lacking for equal strength. Yet the white skin was moulded most smoothly, without such muscular swelling as made his might evident. Such love as his frank self-love could conceive was called forth by an ardent admiration for this supreme stranger. More admiration than love was in his passion, and therefore he was free from a lover's hesitancy and delicate reserve and doubts. Frankly and boldly he courted her favour by looks and tones, and an address that came of natural ease, needless of skill by practice. Nor was she a woman to be wooed otherwise. Tender whispers and sighs would never gain her ear, but her eyes would brighten and shine if she heard of a brave feat, and her prompt hand in sympathy fall swiftly on the axe shaft and clasp it hard. That movement ever fired Swain's admiration anew. He watched for it, strove to elicit it, and glowed when it came. Wonderful and beautiful was that wrist, slender and steel strong. Also the smooth, shapely hand that curved so fast and firm, ready to deal instant death. Desiring to feel the pressure of these hands, this bold lover schemed with palpable directness, proposing that she should hear how their hunting songs were sung, with a chorus that signalled hands to be clasped. So his splendid voice gave the verse, and as the chorus was taken up, he claimed her hands, and even through the easy grip felt, as he desired, the strength that was latent, and the vigour that quickened the very finger-tips, as the song fired her, and her voice was caught out of her by the rhythmic swell, and rang clear on the top of the closing surge. Afterwards she sang alone. For contrast, or in the pride of swaying moods by her voice, she chose a mournful song that drifted along in a minor chant, sad as a wind that dirges. Oh, let me go, around spin wreaths of snow, the dark earth sleeps below. Far up the plain moans on a voice of pain, where shall my babe be lain? In my white breast lay the sweet life to rest, lay where it can lie best. Hush, hush its cries, dense night is on the skies, 2 stars are in thine eyes. Come, babe, away, but lie thou till dawn be grey, who must be dead by day. This cannot last, but ere the sickening blast, all sorrow shall be past, and kings shall be low bending at thy knee, worshipping life from thee. For men long sore to hope of what's before, to leave the things of yore. Mine and not thine, how deep their jewels shine, peace laps thy head, not mine. Old Trella came tottering from her corner, shaken to additional palsy by an aroused memory. She strained her dim eyes towards the singer, and then bent her head, that the one ear yet sensible to sound might avail of every note. At the close, groping forward, she murmured with the high-pitched quaver of old age, "So she sang, my Thora, my last and brightest. What is she like, she whose voice is like my dead Thora's? Are her eyes blue?" "Blue as the sky." "So were my Thora's. Is her hair fair and in plaits to the waist?" "Even so," answered Whitefell herself, and met the advancing hands with her own, and guided them to corroborate her words by touch. "Like my dead Thora's," repeated the old woman, and then her trembling hands rested on the fur-clad shoulders, and she bent forward and kissed the smooth fair face that Whitefell upturned, nothing loth to receive and return the caress. So Christian saw them as he entered. He stood a moment. After the starless darkness and the icy night air and the fierce silent 2 hours' race, his senses reeled on sudden entrance into warmth and light and the cheery hum of voices. A sudden unforeseen anguish assailed him, as now first he entertained the possibility of being overmatched by her wiles and her daring, if at the approach of pure death she should start up at bay, transformed to a terrible beast, and achieve a savage glut at the last. He looked with horror and pity on the harmless, helpless folk, so unwitting of outrage to their comfort and security. The dreadful thing in their midst, that was veiled from their knowledge by womanly beauty, was a centre of pleasant interest. There, before him, signally impressive, was poor old Trella, weakest and feeblest of all in fond nearness, and a moment might bring about the revelation of a monstrous horror, a ghastly, deadly danger, set loose and at bay in a circle of girls and women and careless, defenceless men. So hideous and terrible a thing as might crack the brain or curdle the heart stone dead. And he alone of the throng prepared. For one breathing space he faltered, no longer than that, while over him swept the agony of compunction that yet could not make him surrender his purpose. He alone? Nay, but Tyre also, and he crossed to the dumb sole sharer of his knowledge. So timeless is thought that a few seconds only lay between his lifting of the latch and his loosening of Tyre's collar. But in those few seconds succeeding his first glance, as lightning swift had been the impulses of others, their motion as quick and sure. Swain's vigilant eye had darted upon him, and instantly his every fibre was alert with hostile instinct. And, half divining, half incredulous of Christian's object in stooping to Tyre, he came hastily, wary, wrathful, resolute to oppose the malice of his wild-eyed brother. But beyond Swain Rose Whitefell, blanching white as her furs, and with eyes grown fierce and wild. She leapt down the room to the door, whirling her long robe closely to her. "Hark!" she panted, "the signal horn! Hark! I must go!" as she snatched at the latch to be out and away. For one precious moment Christian had hesitated on the half-loosened collar, for except the womanly form were exchanged for the bestial, Tyre's jaws would gnash to rags his honour of manhood. Then he heard her voice and turned. Too late. As she tugged at the door, he sprang across, grasping his flask, but Swain dashed between and caught him back irresistibly, so that a most frantic effort only availed to wrench one arm free. With that, on the impulse of sheer despair, he cast at her with all his force. The door swung behind her, and the flask flew into fragments against it. Then, as Swain's grasp slackened, and he met the questioning astonishment of surrounding faces with a hoarse, inarticulate cry, "God help us all!" he said, "she is a werewolf!" Swain turned upon him. "Liar! Coward!" and his hands gripped his brother's throat with deadly force, as though the spoken word could be killed so. And as Christian struggled, lifted him clear off his feet, and flung him crashing backward. So furious was he that, as his brother lay motionless, he stirred him roughly with his foot, till their mother came between, crying shame. And yet then he stood by, his teeth set, his brows knit, his hands clenched, ready to enforce silence again violently, as Christian rose staggering and bewildered. But utter silence and submission were more than he expected, and turned his anger into contempt for one so easily cowed, and held in subjection by mere force. "He's mad," he said, turning on his heel as he spoke, so that he lost his mother's look of pained reproach at this sudden free utterance of what was a lurking dread within her. Christian was too spent for the effort of speech. His hard-drawn breath laboured in great sobs, his limbs were powerless and unstrung in utter relax, after hard service. Failure in his endeavour induced a stupor of misery and despair. In addition was the wretched humiliation of open violence and strife with his brother, and the distress of hearing misjudging contempt expressed without reserve. For he was aware that Swain had turned to allay the scared excitement, half by imperious mastery, half by explanation and argument that showed painful disregard of brotherly consideration. All this unkindness of his twin he charged upon the fell thing who had wrought this their first dissension, and most terrible thought, interposed between them so effectually that Swain was wilfully blind and deaf on her account, resentful of interference, arbitrary beyond reason. Dread and perplexity unfathomable darkened upon him. Unshared, the burden was overwhelming, a foreboding of unspeakable calamity, based upon his ghastly discovery, bore down upon him, crushing out hope of power to withstand impending fate. Swain the while was observant of his brother, despite the continual check of finding, turn and glance when he would, Christian's eyes always upon him, with a strange look of helpless distress, discomposing enough to the angry aggressor. "Like a beaten dog," he said to himself, rallying contempt to withstand compunction. Observation set him wondering on Christian's exhausted condition. The heavy laboring breath and the slack inert fall of the limbs told surely of unusual and prolonged exertion. And then why had close upon 2 hours' absence been followed by open hostility against Whitefell? Suddenly, the fragments of the flask giving a clue, he guessed all, and faced about to stare at his brother in amaze. He forgot that the motive scheme was against Whitefell, demanding derision and resentment from him. That was swept out of remembrance by astonishment and admiration for the feat of speed and endurance. In eagerness to question, he inclined to attempt a generous part, and frankly offer to heal the breach. But Christian's depression and sad following gaze provoked him to self-justification by recalling the offence of that outrageous utterance against Whitefell, and the impulse passed. Then other considerations counselled silence, and afterwards a humour possessed him to wait and see how Christian would find opportunity to proclaim his performance and establish the fact, without exciting ridicule on account of the absurdity of the errand. This expectation remained unfulfilled. Christian never attempted the proud avowal that would have placed his feat on record to be told to the next generation. That night Swain and his mother talked long and late together, shaping into certainty the suspicion that Christian's mind had lost its balance, and discussing the evident cause. For Swain, declaring his own love for Whitefell, suggested that his unfortunate brother, with a like passion, they being twins in loves as in birth, had through jealousy and despair turned from love to hate, until reason failed at the strain, and a craze developed, which the malice and treachery of madness made a serious and dangerous force. So Swain theorized, convincing himself as he spoke, convincing afterwards others who advanced doubts against Whitefell, fettering his judgment by his advocacy, and by his staunch defence of her hurried flight, silencing his own inner consciousness of the unaccountability of her action. But a little time, and Swain lost his vantage in the shock of a fresh horror at the homestead. Trella was no more, and her end a mystery. The poor old woman crawled out in a bright gleam to visit a bedridden gossip living beyond the fir grove. Under the tree she was last seen, halting for her companion, sent back for a forgotten present. Quick alarm sprang, calling every man to the search. Her stick was found among the brushwood only a few paces from the path, but no track or stain, for a gusty wind was sifting the snow from the branches, and hid all sign of how she came by her death. So panic-stricken were the farm folk that none dared go singly on the search. Known danger could be braced, but not this stealthy death that walked by day invisible, that cut off alike the child in his play and the aged woman so near to her quiet grave. "Roll she kissed, Trella she kissed." So rang Christian's frantic cry again and again, till Swain dragged him away and strove to keep him apart, albeit in his agony of grief and remorse he accused himself wildly as answerable for the tragedy, and gave clear proof that the charge of madness was well founded, if strange looks and desperate, incoherent words were evidence enough. But thenceforward all Swain's reasoning and mastery could not uphold Whitefell above suspicion. He was not called upon to defend her from accusation when Christian had been brought to silence again, but he well knew the significance of this fact, that her name, formerly uttered freely and often, he never heard now. It was huddled away into whispers that he could not catch. The passing of time did not sweep away the superstitious fears that Swain despised. He was angry and anxious, eager that Whitefell should return, and merely by her bright, gracious presence reinstate herself in favour. But doubtful if all his authority and example could keep from her notice an altered aspect of welcome, and he foresaw clearly that Christian would prove unmanageable, and might be capable of some dangerous outbreak. For a time the twins' variance was marked, on Swain's part by an air of rigid indifference, on Christian's by heavy downcast silence, and a nervous apprehensive observation of his brother. Superadded to his remorse and foreboding, Swain's displeasure weighed upon him intolerably, and the remembrance of their violent rupture was a ceaseless misery. The elder brother, self-sufficient and insensitive, could little know how deeply his unkindness stabbed. A depth and force of affection such as Christian's was unknown to him. The loyal subservience that he could not appreciate had encouraged him to domineer. This strenuous opposition to his reason and will was accounted as furious malice, if not sheer insanity. Christian's surveillance galled him incessantly, and embarrassment and danger he foresaw as the outcome. Therefore, that suspicion might be lulled, he judged it wise to make overtures for peace. Most easily done. A little kindliness, a few evidences of consideration, a slight return of the old brotherly imperiousness, and Christian replied by a gratefulness and relief that might have touched him had he understood all, but instead increased his secret contempt. So successful was this finesse that when, late on a day, a message summoning Christian to a distance was transmitted by Swain, no doubt of its genuineness occurred. When his errand proved useless, he set out to return. Mistake or misapprehension was all that he surmised. Not till he sighted the homestead lying low between the night-grey snow ridges did vivid recollection of the time when he had tracked that horror to the door rouse an intense dread, and with it a hardly defined suspicion. His grasp tightened on the bear-spear that he carried as a staff. Every sense was alert, every muscle strung. Excitement urged him on, caution checked him, and the two governed his long stride, swiftly, noiselessly, to the climax he felt was at hand. As he drew near to the outer gates, a light shadow stirred and went, as though the grey of the snow had taken detached motion. A darker shadow stayed and faced Christian, striking his life-blood chill with utmost despair. Swain stood before him, and surely the shadow that went was Whitefell. They had been together, close. Had she not been in his arms, near enough for lips to meet? There was no moon, but the stars gave light enough to show that Swain's face was flushed and elate. The flush remained, though the expression changed quickly at sight of his brother. How, if Christian had seen all, should one of his frenzied outbursts be met and managed? By resolution? By indifference? He halted between the two, and as a result he swaggered. "Whitefell?" questioned Christian, hoarse and breathless. "Yes?" Swain's answer was a query, with an intonation that implied he was clearing the ground for action. From Christian came, "Have you kissed her?" like a bolt direct, staggering Swain by its sheer prompt temerity. He flushed yet darker, and yet half smiled over this earnest of success he had won. Had there been really between himself and Christian the rivalry that he imagined, his face had enough of the insolence of triumph to exasperate jealous rage. "You dare ask this?" "Swain, oh, Swain, I must know. You have." The ring of despair and anguish in his tone angered Swain, misconstruing it. Jealousy urging to such presumption was intolerable. "Mad fool," he said, constraining himself no longer. "Win for yourself a woman to kiss. Leave mine without question. Such an one as I should desire to kiss is such an one as shall never allow a kiss to you." Then Christian fully understood his supposition. "I?" he cried. "Whitefell? That deadly thing? Swain, are you blind? Mad? I would save you from her, a werewolf." Swain, maddened again at the accusation, a dastardly way of revenge, as he conceived, and instantly, for the second time, the brothers were at strife violently. But Christian was now too desperate to be scrupulous, for a dim glimpse had shot a possibility into his mind, and to be free to follow it, the striking of his brother was a necessity. Thank God he was armed, and so Swain's equal. Facing his assailant with the bear spear, he struck up his arms, and with the butt end hit hard, so that he fell. The matchless runner leapt away on the instant, to follow a forlorn hope. Swain, on regaining his feet, was as amazed as angry at this unaccountable flight. He knew in his heart that his brother was no coward, and that it was unlike him to shrink from an encounter because defeat was certain, and cruel humiliation from a vindictive victor probable. Of the uselessness of pursuit he was well aware. He must abide his chagrin, content to know that his time for advantage would come. Since Whitefell had parted to the right, Christian to the left, the event of a sequent encounter did not occur to him. And now Christian, acting on the dim glimpse he had had, just as Swain turned upon him, of something that moved against the sky along the ridge behind the homestead, was staking his only hope on a chance, and his own superlative speed. If what he saw was really Whitefell, he guessed she was bending her steps towards the open wastes, and there was just a possibility that, by a straight dash and a desperate, perilous leap over a sheer bluff, he might yet meet her or head her. And then he had no further thought. It was past, the quick, fierce race, and the chance of death at the leap, and he halted in a hollow to fetch his breath and to look. Did she come? Had she gone? She came. She came with a smooth, gliding, noiseless speed that was neither walking nor running. Her arms were folded in her furs that were drawn tight about her body. The white lappets from her head were wrapped and knotted closely beneath her face. Her eyes were set on a far distance. So she went, till the even sway of her going was startled to a pause by Christian. "Fell!" She drew a quick, sharp breath at the sound of her name, thus mutilated, and faced Swain's brother. Her eyes glittered, her upper lip was lifted and showed the teeth. The half of her name, impressed with an ominous sense as uttered by him, warned her of the aspect of a deadly foe. Yet she cast loose her robes till they trailed ample, and spoke as a mild woman. "What would you?" Then Christian answered with his solemn, dreadful accusation. "You kissed Rol, and Rol is dead. You kissed Trella. She is dead. You have kissed Swain, my brother, but he shall not die." He added, "You may live till midnight." The edge of the teeth and the glitter of the eyes stayed a moment, and her right hand also slid down to the axe shaft. Then, without a word, she swerved from him and sprang out and away, swiftly over the snow. And Christian sprang out and away and followed her swiftly over the snow, keeping behind, but half a stride's length from her side. So they went running together, silent, towards the vast wastes of snow, where no living thing but they two moved under the stars of night. Never before had Christian so rejoiced in his powers. The gift of speed and the training of use and endurance were priceless to him now. Though midnight was hours away, he was confident that, go where that fell thing would, hasten as she would, she could not outstrip him nor escape from him. Then, when came the time for transformation, when the woman's form made no longer a shield against a man's hand, he could slay or be slain to save Swain. He had struck his dear brother in dire extremity, but he could not, though reason urged, strike a woman. For 1 mile, for 2 miles, they ran, Whitefell ever foremost, Christian ever at equal distance from her side, so near that now and again her outflying furs touched him. She spoke no word, nor he. She never turned her head to look at him, nor swerved to evade him, but with set face looking forward, sped straight on, over rough, over smooth, aware of his nearness by the regular beat of his feet and the sound of his breath behind. In a while she quickened her pace. From the first, Christian had judged of her speed as admirable, yet with exulting security in his own excelling and enduring whatever her efforts. But when the pace increased, he found himself put to the test as never had he been before in any race. Her feet indeed flew faster than his. It was only by his length of stride that he kept his place at her side. But his heart was high and resolute, and he did not fear failure yet. So the desperate race flew on. Their feet struck up the powdery snow, their breath smoked into the sharp, clear air, and they were gone before the air was cleared of snow and vapour. Now and then Christian glanced up to judge, by the rising of the stars, of the coming of midnight. So long, so long! Whitefell held on without slack. She, it was evident, with confidence in her speed proving matchless, as resolute to outrun her pursuer as he to endure till midnight and fulfil his purpose. And Christian held on, still self-assured. He could not fail, he would not fail. To avenge Rall and Trella was motive enough for him to do what man could do. But for Swain more. She had kissed Swain, but he should not die too. With Swain to save, he could not fail. Never before was such a race as this. No, not when in old Greece man and maid raced together with two fates at stake. For the hard running was sustained and unabated, while star after star rose and went wheeling up towards midnight, for 1 hour, for 2 hours. Then Christian saw and heard what shot him through with fear. Where a fringe of trees hung round a slope, he saw something dark moving, and heard a yelp, followed by a full horrid cry, and the dark spread out upon the snow, a pack of wolves in pursuit. Of the beasts alone he had little cause for fear. At the pace he held he could distance them, four-footed though they were. But of Whitefell's wiles he had infinite apprehension, for how might she not avail herself of the savage jaws of these wolves, akin as they were to half her nature? She vouchsafed to them nor look nor sign, but Christian, on an impulse to assure himself that she should not escape him, caught and held the back-flung edge of her furs, running still. She turned like a flash with a beastly snarl, teeth and eyes gleaming again. Her axe shone on the upstroke, on the downstroke, as she hacked at his hand. She had lopped it off at the wrist, but that he parried with the bear-spear. Even then she shore through the shaft and shattered the bones of the hand at the same blow, so that he loosed perforce. Then again they raced on as before, Christian not losing a pace, though his left hand swung useless, bleeding and broken. The snarl, indubitable, though modified from a woman's organs, the vicious fury revealed in teeth and eyes, the sharp arrogant pain of her maiming blow, caught away Christian's heed of the beasts behind, by striking into him close, vivid realization of the infinitely greater danger that ran before him in that deadly thing. When he bethought him to look behind, lo, the pack had but reached their tracks and instantly slunk aside, cowed. The yell of pursuit changed to yelps and whines, so abhorrent was that fell creature to beast as to man. She had drawn her furs more closely to her, disposing them so that, instead of flying loose at her heels, no drapery hung lower than her knees, and this without a check to her wonderful speed, nor embarrassment by the cumbering of the folds. She held her head as before, her lips were firmly set, only the tense nostrils gave her breath, not a sign of distress witnessed to the long sustaining of that terrible speed. But on Christian by now the strain was telling palpably. His head weighed heavy, and his breath came laboring in great sobs. The bear-spear would have been a burden now. His heart was beating like a hammer, but such a dullness oppressed his brain that it was only by degrees he could realize his helpless state. Wounded and weaponless, chasing that terrible thing that was a fierce, desperate, axe-armed woman, except she should assume the beast with fangs yet more formidable. And still the far, slow stars went lingering nearly an hour from midnight. So far was his brain astray that an impression took him that she was fleeing from the midnight stars, whose gain was by such slow degrees that a time equalling days and days had gone in the race round the northern circle of the world, and days as long might last before the end, except she slackened, or except he failed. But he would not fail yet. How long had he been praying so? He had started with a self-confidence and reliance that had felt no need for that aid, and now it seemed the only means by which to restrain his heart from swelling beyond the compass of his body, by which to cherish his brain from dwindling and shrivelling quite away. Some sharp-toothed creature kept tearing and dragging at his maimed left hand. He never could see it. He could not shake it off, but he prayed it off at times. The clear stars before him took to shuddering, and he knew why. They shuddered at sight of what was behind him. He had never divined before that strange things hid themselves from men under pretense of being snow-clad mounds or swaying trees. But now they came slipping out from their harmless covers to follow him, and mock at his impotence to make a kindred thing resolve to truer form. He knew the air behind him was thronged. He heard the hum of innumerable murmurings together. But his eyes could never catch them, they were too swift and nimble. Yet he knew they were there, because on a backward glance he saw the snow mounds surge as they grovelled flatlings out of sight. He saw the trees reel as they screwed themselves rigid past recognition among the boughs. And after such glance the stars for a while returned to steadfastness, and an infinite stretch of silence froze upon the chill grey world, only deranged by the swift even beat of the flying feet, and his own, slower from the longer stride and the sound of his breath. And for some clear moments he knew that his only concern was to sustain his speed regardless of pain and distress, to deny with every nerve he had her power to outstrip him or widen the space between them, till the stars crept up to midnight. Then out again would come that crowd invisible, humming and hustling behind, dense and dark enough, he knew, to blot out the stars at his back, yet ever skipping and jerking from his sight. A hideous check came to the race. Whitefell swirled about and leapt to the right, and Christian, unprepared for so prompt a lurch, found close at his feet a deep pit yawning, and his own impetus past control. but he snatched at her as he bore past, clasping her right arm with his one whole hand, and the two swung together upon the brink. And her straining away in self-preservation was vigorous enough to counterbalance his headlong impulse, and brought them reeling together to safety. Then, before he was verily sure that they were not to perish so, crashing down, he saw her gnashing in wild, pale fury as she wrenched to be free, and, since her right hand was in his grasp, used her axe left-handed, striking back at him. The blow was effectual enough even so. His right arm dropped powerless, gashed and with the lesser bone broken, that jarred with horrid pain when he let it swing, as he leaped out again and ran to recover the few feet she had gained from his pause at the shock. The near escape and this new quick pain made again every faculty alive and intense. He knew that what he followed was most surely death animate. Wounded and helpless, he was utterly at her mercy, if so she should realize and take action. Hopeless to avenge, hopeless to save, his very despair for Swain swept him on to follow, and precede the kiss doomed to death. Could he yet fail to hunt that thing past midnight, out of the womanly form alluring and treacherous into lasting restraint of the bestial, which was the last shred of hope left from the confident purpose of the outset? Swain, Swain, oh Swain! He thought he was praying, though his heart wrung out nothing but this: Swain, Swain, oh Swain! The last hour from midnight had lost half its quarters, and the stars were lifting up the great minutes, and again his greatening heart and his shrinking brain and the sickening agony that swung at either side conspired to appall the will that had only seeming empire over his feet. Now Whitefell's body was so closely enveloped that not a lap nor an edge flew free. She stretched forward strangely aslant, leaning from the upright poise of a runner. She cleared the ground at times by long bounds, gaining an increase of speed that Christian agonized to equal. Because the stars pointed that the end was nearing, the black brood came behind again, and followed, noising. Ah, if they could but be kept quiet and still, nor slip their usual harmless masks to encourage with their interest the last speed of their most deadly congener! What shape had they? Should he ever know? If it were not that he was bound to compel the fell thing that ran before him into her truer form, he might face about and follow them. No, no, not so. If he might do anything but what he did, race, and racing bear this agony, he would just stand still and die, to be quit of the pain of breathing. He grew bewildered, uncertain of his own identity, doubting of his own true form. He could not be really a man, no more than that running thing was really a woman. His real form was only hidden under embodiment of a man, but what it was he did not know. And Swain's real form he did not know. Swain lay fallen at his feet, where he had struck him down, his own brother. He stumbled over him, and had to overleap him and race harder because she who had kissed Swain leapt so fast. Swain, Swain, oh Swain! Why did the stars stop to shudder? Midnight else had surely come. The leaning, leaping thing looked back at him with a wild, fierce look, and laughed in savage scorn and triumph. He saw in a flash why, for within a time measurable by seconds she would have escaped him utterly. As the land lay, a slope of ice slunk on the one hand. On the other a steep rose, shouldering forwards. Between the two was space for a foot to be planted, but none for a body to stand. Yet a juniper bough, thrusting out, gave a handhold secure enough for one with a resolute grasp to swing past the perilous place and pass on safe. Though the first seconds of the last moment were going, she dared to flash back a wicked look and laugh at the pursuer who was impotent to grasp. The crisis struck convulsive life into his last supreme effort. His will surged up indomitable. His speed proved matchless yet. He leapt with a rush, passed her before her laugh had time to go out, and turned short, barring the way, and braced to withstand her. She came hurling desperate, with a feint to the right hand, and then launched herself upon him with a spring like a wild beast when it leaps to kill. And he, with one strong arm and a hand that could not hold, with one strong hand and an arm that could not guide and sustain, he caught and held her even so, and they fell together. And because he felt his whole arm slipping and his whole hand loosing to slack the dreadful agony of the wrenched bone above, he caught and held with his teeth the tunic at her knee as she struggled up and wrung off his hands to overleap him victorious. Like lightning she snatched her axe and struck him on the neck, deep, once, twice. His life-blood gushed out, staining her feet. The stars touched midnight. The death scream he heard was not his, for his set teeth had hardly yet relaxed when it rang out. And the dreadful cry began with a woman's shriek and changed and ended as the yell of a beast. And before the final blank overtook his dying eyes, he saw that she gave place to it. He saw more, that life gave place to death, causelessly, incomprehensibly. For he did not presume that no holy water could be more holy, more potent to destroy an evil thing than life-blood of a pure heart poured out for another in free-willing devotion. His own true hidden reality that he had desired to know grew palpable, recognizable. It seemed to him just this, a great, glad, abounding hope that he had saved his brother. Too expansive to be contained by the limited form of a sole man, it yearned for a new embodiment, infinite as the stars. What did it matter to that true reality that the man's brain shrank, till it was nothing, that the man's body could not retain the huge pain of his heart, and heaved it out through the red exit riven at the neck, that the black noise came again hurtling from behind, reinforced by that dissolved shape, and blotted out forever the man's sight, hearing, sense. In the early grey of day, Swain chanced upon the footprints of a man, of a runner, as he saw by the shifted snow, and the direction they had taken aroused curiosity, since a little farther their line must be crossed by the edge of a sheer height. He turned to trace them, and so doing the length of the stride struck his attention, a stride long as his own if he ran. He knew he was following Christian. In his anger he had hardened himself to be indifferent to the night-long absence of his brother. But now, seeing where the footsteps went, he was seized with compunction and dread. He had failed to give thought and care to his poor frantic twin, who might, was it possible, have rushed to a frantic death. His heart stood still when he came to the place where the leap had been taken. A piled edge of snow had fallen, too, and nothing but snow lay below when he peered. Along the upper edge he ran for a furlong, till he came to a dip where he could slip and climb down, and then back again on the lower level to the pile of fallen snow. There he saw that the vigorous running had started afresh. He stood pondering, vexed that any man should have taken that leap where he had not ventured to follow, vexed that he had been beguiled to such painful emotions, guessing vainly at Christian's object in this mad freak. He began sauntering along, half unconsciously following his brother's track, and so in a while he came to the place where the footprints were doubled. Small prints were these others, small as a woman's, though the pace from one to another was longer than that which the skirts of women allow. Did not Whitefell tread so? A dreadful guess appalled him, so dreadful that he recoiled from belief. Yet his face grew ashy white, and he gasped to fetch back motion to his checked heart. Unbelievable? Close attention showed how the smaller footfall had altered for greater speed, striking into the snow with a deeper onset and a lighter pressure on the heels. Unbelievable? Could any woman but Whitefell run so? Could any man but Christian run so? The guess became a certainty. He was following where alone in the dark night Whitefell had fled from Christian pursuing. Such villainy set heart and brain on fire with rage and indignation, such villainy in his own brother, till lately love-worthy, praiseworthy, though a fool for meekness. He would kill Christian. Had he lives many as the footprints he had trodden, vengeance should demand them all. In a tempest of murderous hate he followed on in haste, for the track was plain enough, starting with such a burst of speed as could not be maintained, but brought him back soon to a plod for the spent, sobbing breath to be regulated. He cursed Christian aloud, and called Whitefell's name on high in a frenzied expense of passion. His grief itself was a rage, being such an intolerable anguish of pity and shame at the thought of his love. Whitefell, who had parted from his kiss free and radiant, to be hounded straightway by his brother, mad with jealousy, fleeing for more than life, while her lover was housed at his ease. If he had but known, he raved, in impotent rebellion at the cruelty of events, if he had but known that his strength and love might have availed in her defence. Now the only service to her that he could render was to kill Christian. As a woman he knew she was matchless in speed, matchless in strength, but Christian was matchless in speed among men, nor easily to be matched in strength. Brave and swift and strong though she were, what chance had she against a man of his strength and inches, frantic, too, and intent on horrid revenge against his brother, his successful rival? Mile after mile he followed with a bursting heart. More piteous, more tragic seemed the case at this evidence of Whitefell's splendid supremacy, holding her own so long against Christian's famous speed, so long that his love and admiration grew more and more boundless, and his grief and indignation therewith also. Whenever the track lay clear he ran, with such reckless prodigality of strength that it soon was spent, and he dragged on heavily, till sometimes on the ice of a mere, sometimes on a wind-swept place, all signs were lost, but so undeviating had been their line that a course straight on, and then short questing to either hand, recovered them again. Hour after hour had gone by through more than half that winter day before ever he came to the place where the trampled snow showed that a scurry of feet had come and gone, wolves' feet, and gone most amazingly. Only a little beyond he came to the lopped point of Christian's bear spear. Farther on he would see where the remnant of the useless shaft had been dropped. The snow here was dashed with blood, and the footsteps of the two had fallen closer together. Some hoarse sound of exultation came from him that might have been a laugh had breath sufficed. "Oh, Whitefell, my poor, brave love, well struck!" he groaned, torn by his pity and great admiration, as he guessed surely how she had turned and dealt a blow. The sight of the blood inflamed him as it might a beast that ravens. He grew mad with a desire to have Christian by the throat once again, not to loose this time till he had crushed out his life, or beat out his life, or stabbed out his life, or all these, and torn him piecemeal likewise, and then, not till then, bleed his heart with weeping, like a child, like a girl, over the piteous fate of his poor lost love. On, through the aching time, toiling and straining in the track of those two superb runners, aware of the marvel of their endurance, but unaware of the marvel of their speed, that in the 3 hours before midnight had overpassed all that vast distance that he could only traverse from twilight to twilight. For clear daylight was passing when he came to the edge of an old marl pit, and saw how the two who had gone before had stamped and trampled together in desperate peril on the verge. And here fresh blood-stains spoke to him of a valiant defence against his infamous brother. And he followed where the blood had dripped, till the cold had staunched its flow, taking a savage gratification from this evidence that Christian had been gashed deeply, maddening afresh with desire to do likewise more excellently, and so slake his murderous hate. And he began to know that through all his despair he had entertained a germ of hope that grew apace, rained upon by his brother's blood. He strove on as best he might, wrung now by an access of hope, now of despair, in agony to reach the end, however terrible, sick with the aching of the toiled miles that deferred it. And the light went lingering out of the sky, giving place to uncertain stars. He came to the finish. 2 bodies lay in a narrow place. Christian's was one, but the other beyond, not Whitefell's. There where the footsteps ended lay a great white wolf. At the sight Swain's strength was blasted. Body and soul he was struck down, grovelling. The stars had grown sure and intense before he stirred from where he had dropped prone. Very feebly he crawled to his dead brother, and laid his hands upon him, and crouched so, afraid to look or stir farther. Cold, stiff hours, dead. Yet the dead body was his only shelter and stay in that most dreadful hour. His soul, stripped bare of all sceptic comfort, cowered, shivering, naked, abject, and the living clung to the dead, out of piteous need for grace from the soul that had passed away. He rose to his knees, lifting the body. Christian had fallen face forward in the snow, with his arms flung up and wide, and so had the frost made him rigid, strange, ghastly, unyielding to Swain's lifting, so that he laid him down again, and crouched above, with his arms fast round him, and a low, heart-wrung groan. When at last he found force to raise his brother's body and gather it in his arms, tight clasped to his breast, he tried to face the thing that lay beyond. The sight set his limbs in a palsy with horror and dread. His senses had failed and fainted in utter cowardice, but for the strength that came from holding dead Christian in his arms, enabling him to compel his eyes to endure the sight, and take into the brain the complete aspect of the thing. No wound, only blood-stains on the feet. The great grim jaws had a savage grin, though dead stiff. And his kiss, he could bear it no longer, and turned away, nor ever looked again. And the dead man in his arms, knowing the full horror, had followed and faced it for his sake, had suffered agony and death for his sake. In the neck was the deep death gash, one arm and both hands were dark with frozen blood, for his sake. Dead he knew him as in life he had not known him, to give the right meed of love and worship. Because the outward man lacked perfection and strength equal to his, he had taken the love and worship of that great pure heart as his due. He, so unworthy in the inner reality, so mean, so despicable, callous and contemptuous towards the brother who had laid down his life to save him. He longed for utter annihilation, that so he might lose the agony of knowing himself so unworthy such perfect love. The frozen calm of death on the face appalled him. He dared not touch it with lips that had cursed so lately, with lips fouled by kiss of the horror that had been death. He struggled to his feet, still clasping Christian. The dead man stood upright within his arm, frozen rigid. The eyes were not quite closed, the head had stiffened, bowed slightly to one side. The arms stayed straight and wide. It was the figure of one crucified, the blood-stained hands also conforming. So living and dead went back along the track that one had passed in the deepest passion of love, and one in the deepest passion of hate. All that night Swain toiled through the snow, bearing the weight of dead Christian, treading back along the steps he before had trodden, when he was wronging with vilest thoughts and cursing with murderous hatred the brother who all the while lay dead for his sake. Cold, silence, darkness encompassed the strong man bowed with a dolorous burden, and yet he knew surely that that night he entered hell, and trod hell-fire along the homeward road, and endured through it only because Christian was with him. And he knew surely that to him Christian had been as Christ, and had suffered and died to save him from his sins. End of Section 4.